Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Micheal Roth?
This is he.
Micheal, what a pleasure to have you on the phone, and what a pleasure to speak to you and for you to be part of the Quarantine Tapes. Tell me, where do I find you at the present moment?
Paul, it's wonderful to hear your voice, and you find me in Monterey, but not Monterey, California, Monterey, Massachusetts, which is in the southern Berkshires.
And what are your days like for the moment during this quarantine time?
Well, they've changed dramatically in the last couple of days. Up until a couple of days ago, I was on campus at Wesleyan University, where I'm the president, and we have a couple of hundred students who were left after we closed the campus, mostly in mid-March. And so I thought I should stay on campus, even though I had no face-to-face meetings anymore. Everyone was Zooming. And so I was on campus and up early in the morning, as is our habit. My wife, Kari Weil, also teaches at Wesleyan. And getting on the computer, I would see my daughter, Sophie, who with her partner, Jay, had come to stay with us. Sophie is a kindergarten teacher in Brooklyn, at a kindergarten school for low-income students, and they moved the whole class online, believe it or not. So,
how does it work? I'm very curious. I've been meaning to speak to a kindergarten teacher. How does Zoom work for kindergarten students?
Well, very badly with some people, because and very well with others. If the kid's parent is there to help them log on, it makes an enormous difference. Many of Sophie's students are families are Spanish speaking, and so she would, as is Sophie, and so they would. Sophie would speak to the parents about helping them get online. And once they were online, they seemed to be able to do. Some of the students seemed to be able to do the work, but Sophie would show me things that clearly weren't done by students,
but by parents,
because the parents had helped too much.
But
and in other cases,
But I can only imagine that if you're in kindergarten, you might be, well, it happens later in life too, but you might be very distracted and move away from the screen and come back in and out. It must be, this whole moment, and it's something maybe I'll address with you right now is, I know that as a university professor, one of the things I've always admired of your work is that you negotiated with the university to ensure that you could continue not only fundraising, which I know you do very well, but also teaching. So have you continued to teach during this time?
I have. I'll just tell you one last bit about the kindergartens you mentioned, which I think is fascinating, because I said to Sophie, well, if you're back in school in the fall and everyone's wearing masks and there's social distancing, and she said, in some ways, worse than Zoom, because what they really want to do is touch you. These kids want to touch. They want to touch each other. They want to, sometimes they're crying, sometimes they're laughing, but the physicality is so key. I think for the youngest students, that's probably even more vital. For my students, I had a class, Paul, called the Modern and the Postmodern, which is basically a good enough books class. We start with Rousseau and Kant, and we end with Maggie Nelson and Dick Rorty. And I have this class already online through Coursera. So I've had, hundreds of thousands of students who've signed up at least for the class. And I have 50 people who would meet me twice a week at Wesleyan in normal times to talk about these books. We migrated it to Zoom, And I have to say, it was much better than I feared it would be. I found it extremely stressful, but most of them came. Actually, I think the attendance was slightly better than it was on campus. They were all over the country, of course. So there were kids getting up quite early on the West Coast for a morning class on the East Coast. But they did really good work, and most of them were able to hang in there. There were a few students who had real difficulties in their personal lives and with transition. And so we were, all of us, I think, were much more flexible than we would be otherwise. But I think that, in a way, Paul, their ability to come even to the screen twice a week for 90 minutes each time to talk about Baudelaire or to talk about Nietzsche or to talk about Maggie Nelson, it was a respite from the rest of the life they had. So they seem to really become attached to the texts and the discussions about them.
Did this surprise you?
Yes, I thought because I've done the online classes and I've tried to get the students to they could see a much younger Michael Roth giving lectures on this stuff online from 6 or 7 years ago, and they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. They didn't seem that interested in the online format for talking about literature and philosophy. So I thought the Zoom would replicate that, but given the alternatives they had, which were few, I think reading Virginia Woolf together or other things, it became really important to them. And each week they write a response to some quotations from the text. And they were so thoughtful and interesting. And I spent more time reading them and responding to them individually because I felt the same way. Like it was more at stake with my students than it would be when I was one of 4 professors they had on campus. They had lots of other things going on. I have lots of other things going on. So I think in a way it intensified the teaching and learning experience.
It's interesting. I've had occasion to speak with Kwame Dawes and with Maggie Nelson and with Viet Tanwin and others, and they would echo what you're saying, interestingly enough, and they're all surprised. What I'm wondering as a university president who can make executive decisions, are you thinking now, perchance, that perhaps this is something that should continue in one form or another after this pandemic subsides, whatever that might mean?
In one form or another, that's the key to this. It's funny. I had a conversation with a reporter from the New York Times, and I was saying, I just said to you, it's going much better than I thought. And he said, yeah, all the teachers I've spoken with have said that. And all the students that he spoke with said, I can't wait to get back to campus. So I've written a little bit about this, that the campus as a place of amplifying learning, making it more resonant for the students, I think has become much more visible. So although I do think in classes of 100 or 200 students, it's silly to sit in a lecture hall, really. But unless the person is an extraordinarily gifted lecturer, and then it's like going to a concert or something. There's some power of being live. But I think that the campus experience is even more visibly important for students and faculty. But we can use these online tools without fear that they would compromise in-person learning.
Right, because as you were saying, that being in contact is so tremendously important. Now, you were mentioning a moment ago that you have spent some time at Wesleyan, and there are some students who have stayed there. And I'm just curious, what steps has Wesleyan taken to protect job security of non-tenured faculty as well as administrators, custodians, and other staff due to this horrendous pandemic we're experiencing right now?
Well, we've not had to have any furloughs of people who work for Wesleyan. There were some people who worked for the food services company that staffed Wesleyan's dining facilities who would be on furlough in the summer. They normally work until mid-May. And so some of them, not all of them, but some of them stopped work in mid-April because there was no work to do. And this was something, I guess I felt less badly about because of the support that they were able to have both through the union to which they belong and through the CARES Act. Otherwise, we have stayed with our normal workforce. Everyone's working from home, almost everyone. There are public safety officers and physical plant workers who are on campus. And we have been able to maintain that. There's a lot of work to do. If the pandemic doesn't continue to ameliorate, we won't be able to protect everyone's job, because if there's no work to do, we can't protect the job. But if there's work to do, or there's some other version of the work that people are doing, we can certainly maintain the workforce. In our case, 2/3 of our revenue is from the student tuition and fees. So if students aren't there, we don't have the revenue to pay the workforce we normally have. Well, but I'm confident we'll be there.
Well, these details are so important. Now, I know that free speech, freedom of expression are core to your thinking and something you think about so very much. Now, in the news yesterday, there was the affair of the New York Times and Tom Cotton. And yes. I'm really very curious to get your reflections on this. I mean, an op-ed advocating the use of military on domestic protesters. Hundreds of journalists of the New York Times, sometimes at risk of maybe losing their own job, have protested this. What do you make of this controversy? And in a way, asking you this question is hardly innocent, because, as I said, it's something you really think about.
Well, in this book, Safe Enough Spaces, I've written about free speech issues on campus. And I don't think denying someone space in the New York Times is an infringement of their free speech rights. If that's the case, then my rights have been denied several times by the editors of the New York Times on that page. But I don't think of it. I just think they have a lot of people wanting to publish with them. And why publish idiocy and the cultivation of violence? I suppose the answer is, although I don't know the editors involved in this decision, I suppose the answer is because in some ways he is very close to the President of the United States. And so it's not a bad thing to have his view aired, because it's so reprehensible that if his view was hidden or only available to people in the ideological bubbles to which many people go, then maybe you wouldn't believe it was there. So I'm trying to figure out what were they thinking in publishing. If they reject 95% of the submissions that they get, why did they choose this one? I suppose because its reprehensibility was emblematic of the head of the United States government. And that probably should be heard. But I don't see that as free speech. I see that as an editorial decision. Now, it may have been an editorial decision to say, this guy's going to get a lot of eyeballs. When David Shipley was the editor of the op-ed page, I was the president of CCA at the California College of the Arts, and I kind of talked to him about writing for him occasionally, and he said, you're the least likely kind of person to publish with me, because I want people who will piss other people off. And you, as a college president, you really can't do that. So this senator, I mean, this guy, he's really gotten everybody upset. I don't think anyone Times is going to lose their job about not wanting him there. I think it's the old adage, right? It sells newspapers, and so but that's not free speech. That's just, you might think the New York Times had bad politics and bad taste, but I don't think it's a free speech issue.
Another free speech issue pertains directly to the university. How do you think universities should regulate the rights of students and professors to engage in protest movements like, let's say, BDS? What do you make of recent efforts by state governments to criminalize in some way the protest movements?
I think that criminalizing BDS is a really bad idea. I also think BDS is a really bad idea, but that should be debated on campus. So some of my faculty are the leaders of the boycott, divest, and sanction movement against Israel. I think it's a deeply mistaken movement. And I wrote a piece about that in the LA Times years ago when the scholarly associations were backing the BDS movement. And I don't think my faculty who on the other side of this issue should be disciplined. It's an argument. It's a debate. So when Judith Butler, when she was to give that talk in New York at the library, perhaps, and it was canceled on two forms of Zionism because of her association with the BDS. I invited her to come to Wesleyan to give the talk, which she did. I invited her not because I agree with her, although, of course, Judith's views are so nuanced that it's not simply agree or disagree. It's always very interesting.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out.
But I really wanted her to have a place to make her case. And our university is such a place. So I think in that case, this effort to criminalize points of view is especially points of view that are not advocating violence and intimidation. I think that's just a big mistake.
I'm wondering, how has your background in the humanities informed your work as a university president?
I believe that the heart and soul of colleges and universities is this study of enduring questions. And so some of those questions are found in the social sciences and the sciences, although the sciences rightly have a predisposition to contemporary questions and cutting-edge questions. But I think the heart and soul of the university for undergraduate education is the pursuit of enduring questions from a variety of points of view. And so the humanities are absolutely central to that. And I teach these courses on intellectual history and on cinema studies and philosophy. I have been very much dedicated to making sure that the humanities remain vigorous at Wesleyan and other places that look to Wesleyan for ideas about the curriculum, about what does it mean to have a liberal arts education. I call it a pragmatic liberal education rather than liberal arts education.
Why? Why did you use that word? I was very curious.
Well, in this book, Beyond the University, I argue that there's an American tradition of liberal education that is connected to work, to what are you going to do with what you've learned, but in a very broad sense, which I do think is different from the notion of education. I usually joke about that in the French context is, freedom is when you're not working.
Right.
Freedom. The whole point of freedom is that you shouldn't be working. In America, freedom and work are linked together in an interesting way, and the freedom is to do something. And so I think that, and I just draw on Emerson and Jefferson and Du Bois and others, Jane Addams, to show that there's a tradition of broad contextual learning in the United States that's connected to empowering students to be able to do the things they want to do that are meaningful after they graduate. And so I do think that's in the pragmatist tradition. And I say to my students every year, much to their chagrin, if these turn out to be the best 4 years of your lives, we failed you. I'm just copying from a president in the 60s. I don't want them to come back to Wesleyan in 20 years and say, oh, that was when I was at my peak, or that was what I want it to be a resource for them so that years after college, they are still learning from the ways of learning that they acquired at the college or university.
It's so complicated, it seems to me, to be a university president now. The things you have to balance. And I read recently on the Wesleyan blog, I think it was in May 2017, you wrote the following in an article precisely about free speech. You say, another new initiative for intellectual diversity launched with the support of one of our trustees has created an endowment of more than $3 million for exposing students at Wesleyan to ideas outside the liberal consensus. This fall, our own academic departments and centers will begin offering courses and programs to cover topics such as the philosophical and economic conditions of private property, free enterprise, and market economies, and the relationship of tolerance to individual rights, freedom, and voluntary association. I'm wondering, Micheal, isn't there a danger in accepting the premise that ideals like tolerance to individual rights, freedom, and voluntary association are opposed to the liberal consensus?
Oh, well, I think the liberal the consensus on campuses that's usually described as liberal is a consensus that leans away from the kind of Tocquevillian language that is employed there. It leans away from individual rights and towards collective identity and collective rights and politics. And I think it would be a big mistake to not have that on a campus. But I do think that on Wesleyan's campus and on most of the campuses in the Northeast, the humanities programs in particular have very few faculty members who can comfortably teach the conservative traditions or religious or libertarian traditions that I myself don't feel a kinship with, but do teach. But I think that adding faculty who are able to engage with issues from the broadly conservative and religious traditions from the inside would be a good thing for our undergraduates. You know, I had many faculty members debate with me about this, that they think that they should be able to teach their political views in their classes and define their departmental curriculum in ways that exclude certain traditions, because those traditions are so powerful outside the university. I don't agree with that. I do think that we should have more faculty at more of our colleges, universities who can teach religious and conservative traditions from the inside. Because when people tell me, well, I don't need to bring a conservative thinker to campus, I could talk about conservatism even though let's say I'm a Marxist. That reminds me too much of people saying, well, I don't need to hire a person from an underrepresented group because I can teach their tradition even though I'm a bourgeois white man. Or I don't need to hire women because I could teach women's history even though I'm a man. Of course one can, but I do think that the filtering mechanisms of prejudice that have tilted the university curriculum away from certain, what I call enduring questions, should be pushed back against by administrations that, just as we push back against having all, more men or all white people, or, I do think there's a virtue in creating the grounds for more intellectual diversity in a proactive way, rather than just depending on the marketplace of ideas or search committees that just say they're hiring. I hear it all the time. I'm hiring the best person, and it always turns out that the best person shares my political views. Well, that was the kind of language people used to use when they said they didn't, as an excuse for not hiring Jews or not hiring Catholics or not hiring African Americans. And so the only reason the money is important is because otherwise I would have had to take away from departments to create a space for these kinds of discussions. Since I got extra money to do it, I was able to tell faculty, I don't choose these people. I ask faculty to make these choices. And I think it's been helpful.
Yeah, I guess one question is always, in terms of money, is always who does the money come from, and are there strings attached?
In this case, there were no strings attached. It's just what you read is that's the general fields, but all the choices are made by faculty. It's been really fascinating to me because in one case I did recommend someone to come and give a lecture in this endeavor. Someone who I'd met and thought was interesting, had written several books. He was in the English department, and he gave a pro-Trump lecture, actually, and it was just a terrible lecture. I mean, I thought it was just, not because it's pro-Trump. At the time, it was just badly conceived and badly argued. The students tore it to shreds. The place was packed. And Paul, I was so worried that they would just riot and not let this. They let him speak, and then they asked good questions, and he was clearly unprepared for them. And so at the end of the talk, one of the students raised his hand and said, if this is what President Roth means by intellectual diversity, I hope we could do a lot better next time. And I thought to myself, hats off to that kid, he's right. So I think it's incumbent upon faculty leaders and administrators, when they can do it, to intervene to create more intellectual diversity when they can. And just like we've intervened to create more diversity around income or ethnicity or race. And so I've called this an affirmative action program for conservatives, which has pleased no one, as you might suspect.
I imagine.
The conservatives say, we don't need affirmative action. And the folks on the left think that I've somehow sullied the words affirmative action. But the point is just that to be proactive about creating intellectual diversity as adding to the mix views that have a claim for consideration, but are not congenial to the consensus on campus.
Whenever I think about these kinds of tensions, I'm reminded of a wonderful line that Lionel Gossman quoted at the beginning of one of his essays, where he quotes Robert Frost, who said that a liberal is someone who can never take his own side in an argument.
That so much sounds like Lionel.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it? What's happening at Wesleyan this fall? What are the plans? What are the plans at Wesleyan, and what do you, if I might say, in these last moments, what do you hear from your other president colleagues?
Well, I think a lot of us are very eager to offer students the opportunity to be on campus, and we're trying to figure out a way to do that safely. The demonstrations of the last week really have, I think, shaken everybody's thinking in a way, because clearly social distance can be compromised when the goals are deemed to be more important than the social distance. And so how can we create safe enough spaces for our students, reducing risk to them, and especially reducing risk to faculty and staff, who tend to be older and will be more vulnerable to the virus. So what we're doing is we're going to bring people back just a little early, a week earlier, we think. I mean, this is still in process. And if the pandemic continues to recede, that's a big if, of course, we would offer our regular curriculum, although we would plan to have the last week or two after Thanksgiving online. So if people do leave, we don't think they should leave and come back, because that's a contagion opportunity, when the people disperse and return. So we would not have very many visitors to campus over the course of the semester. We would, we would not have visiting lecturers and the like. But we would have social distance in classrooms, and everyone will be wearing masks. There will be lots of testing. We'll be able to take care of people when they get sick. There will be many students who say, I can't come to campus. I'm immunocompromised, or I'm an international student. I can't get back. So we will have everything available. I hope we'll have everything available online as well as in person, to go back to the beginning of our conversation. So we will have these seminars in person. If you don't feel well, if you have symptoms, you should stay home. You can watch it online. If you're stuck in a place and can't get back to campus, you can still keep up pace and have the experience online. And so, and then, tons more cleaning and disinfecting and all that stuff that will happen to try to keep people as safe as possible. That's our goal for the fall. And so much depends on what we learn about the course of the pandemic in the coming weeks.
Micheal, I knew this would happen. Our big enemy here is time.
Yes.
I have to tell you, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to when we see each other again. Thank you.
I look forward to that too, Paul.
Thank you so much for taking my call, and stay well.
And you too, and thank you for calling.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.